"I accept," Clara Whitmore said, and the pen didn't shake in her hand the way she'd thought it would. Across the table, Nathaniel Cross watched her sign with an expression that gave nothing away. Her father couldn't meet her eyes. Her mother had gone so still by the window that for one terrible second Clara thought she'd stopped breathing entirely. The agreement sat between them on the worn pine table like something alive. She was 24 years old. 3 days ago, she hadn't known this man's name. Now she was putting her future on a piece of paper to keep her family from losing everything they had left. If you're already feeling this one in your chest, that's exactly where I want you. Stay with me to the end and tell me in the comments what part of Canada you're listening from tonight. I love knowing how far these stories travel. The morning everything changed, Clara had flour up to her elbows when her father called her name from the front room, and something in his voice made her stomach drop before she even crossed the kitchen threshold. She knew that tone. She'd heard it the year the crops failed twice running. She'd heard it again when the bank letter came. Her father, Walter Whitmore, sat with his hat turned over and over in his hands, studying the table like it owed him an explanation. Her mother, Margaret, stood with her arms wrapped so tight around herself it looked like she was holding her own ribs in place. "Sit down, Clara." "I'll stand." He let out a long breath. Nathaniel Cross came by yesterday. The name dropped into the room and seemed to spread outward, the way bad news always did in a town this small. Everyone in Birch Hollow knew Nathaniel Cross, knew him the way you knew a winter coming, not from any one thing, but from a feeling that settled over the valley whenever his name came up. He ran the timber operation that fed half the county, kept to himself, paid his men fair, and never once been seen drunk or unkind, and still people crossed the street rather than walk past him. 36 years old, never married. Something closed off behind his eyes that nobody could quite name. Why would Nathaniel Cross come to see you? He's offering to clear what we owe, all of it. The mortgage, the equipment loan, what we owe Pruitt's Mill for lumber we never paid back. In exchange for what? Her father didn't answer right away, and that silence told her everything. "No," Clara said, and her voice came out sharper than she meant it to. "Absolutely not. I am 24 years old, Papa. I am not a parcel of land you can hand over to settle a debt." Her mother flinched by the window. Her father wouldn't lift his eyes. "I don't know this man. That makes him a stranger, and you want me to live under a stranger's roof, be a stranger's wife, because 2 bad seasons broke us." "If we lose the farm," her mother said softly, "your father loses everything he built with his own 2 hands. Your brothers have nowhere to go. We'll be scattered across 3 relatives' houses, eating charity nobody can spare. Then we find another way." "We've been finding another way for 3 years," her father said, and there was no anger in it, just a tiredness so deep it scared her more than any shouting would have. "There's nothing left to find." Clara stood in the middle of that room and felt the weight of it pressing down on her shoulders. She thought of her younger brothers, Samuel at 15 and little Joseph at 11. She thought of her mother's hands, cracked and aged beyond their years. She thought of her father's back, curved forward like a man carrying something he could no longer set down. She went into the kitchen alone. She put both palms flat against the counter and stared at the wall until the numbers in her head stopped meaning anything. "I will not do this. I cannot do this. I don't have a choice." 2 days later they met him properly. It happened at the family table, which felt deeply wrong to Clara, that this conversation should take place in the same room where they'd eaten every holiday meal, where her mother had taught her to knead bread at the age of 7. Nathaniel Cross ducked under the doorframe coming in, hat already off, which her father noticed and clearly appreciated. He wasn't what she'd built in her mind. She'd expected someone harder looking, someone who wore his power the way a bruise sits on skin. Instead, he was tall and lean, weathered in the way of a man who worked outdoors in every season, with hands that had clearly never avoided labor. He didn't look at her like a transaction. He looked at her like a person he hadn't yet figured out. "Miss Whitmore, Mr. Cross." She kept her voice even. She had practiced this in the mirror that morning. Her parents excused themselves with an awkwardness that made Clara's jaw tighten. Then it was just the 2 of them. "I don't need you to like this," he said, which was not at all where she expected him to start. "I imagine you've been told you don't have much choice in the matter. I want to say plainly that you do. You can refuse me. I won't come back, and I won't hold it against your family. This only works if you agree to it freely, and if I agree, Clara said carefully. What exactly am I agreeing to? You'd come to Cross Timber as my wife. Your family's debts get cleared, every dollar. What I need is someone to manage the operations house side, the books for the camp kitchen, the coordination with the men's families on the property, the running of things. My last housekeeper passed in the spring. The camp's been struggling without someone steady in that seat, so this is a business arrangement. That's all it has to be. He held her gaze without flinching. I'm not looking for something you don't want to give. You'd have your own room, your own space. Whatever this becomes, it becomes slowly, or it doesn't become anything at all. You wouldn't be trapped. She studied him a long moment. Why me? You could have made this offer to half the families in the county. Your father's an honest man. The way he talked about you when he came to ask, that says something about who raised you. He paused. And I heard you kept this farm standing through the worst of the drought yourself. I'd rather build something with people who are decent than with land that's merely good. This isn't love, he added. Matter of fact, not unkind. It's survival. I think you're smart enough to know that and decide with clear eyes anyway. He stood to leave. At the door, she stopped him. Mr. Cross, if I come to that property and find out anything you told me was untrue, I won't stay quiet about it. Something shifted in his face, not quite a smile. Good, he said. Hold on to that. She told her family yes that evening, the way you say something you've already decided. Her father closed his eyes. Her mother held her too long. That night alone, Clara allowed herself exactly 1 hour to feel everything. The fear, the grief for a life that had just quietly closed a door on her, the anger that drought and bad luck had brought her here. Then she lit the lamp and started a list of what she'd need to bring. The wedding was small, held in the front room with only family present. Clara wore her mother's good dress, taken in at the waist. Nathaniel wore a clean shirt and his least worn coat. When the minister asked if she consented freely, she paused exactly 1 second, long enough for her mother to draw a breath and then said, I do. The ring was plain silver. It fit. The wagon ride to Cross Timber passed mostly in silence. I had Miss Holloway put fresh linens in your room, Nathaniel said eventually. There's food in the larder. Half a mile later, the men know you're coming. I told them you're mistress of the house now. Anyone who doesn't treat you with respect won't have a job by morning. You said that to them? Said it plainly. She turned back to the road. All right, she thought. The wagon rolled on under a wide gray Ontario sky, carrying Clara Whitmore, Clara Cross now, toward a life she hadn't chosen, tended by a man she didn't know. She was frightened, she was angry. But she had her list, her 2 hands, and 24 years of learning that hard things didn't wait for you to feel ready. The first morning at Cross Timber, she woke and lay still, listening. Back home, mornings had a familiar rhythm. Her father's boots on the porch, her brothers arguing over chores. Here there was only work already underway. Men's voices in the yard, low and purposeful, the ring of an axe somewhere in the distance. She got up. She wasn't going to sit in her room wondering what to do with herself. She washed, dressed in something she could work in, braided her hair, and went out. Nathaniel was already gone. A note sat on the table in careful economical handwriting. Coffee's on the stove. Men eat at 6, noon, and 6. Whatever the kitchen needs, write it down and I'll send someone to town. NC. She found the larder stocked but disorganized and spent 20 minutes putting it right. Then she made enough breakfast for the dozen men she'd counted from the window, carried the pan to the camp kitchen, and knocked. The foreman who opened the door was around 60, with a beard like gray wire and an expression she couldn't read. Not unfriendly, just watchful. His name was Harold. He'd worked for Nathaniel 11 years. The younger hands were politely stiff in the way of men who'd been instructed to behave and were actively remembering it. One of them, barely old enough to shave, thanked her twice and went red about it. She didn't see Nathaniel until evening. The house was larger than she'd expected, clearly run by someone who valued function over comfort. No curtains on the windows, a crack in the dining table nobody had fixed. She cleaned, organized, made the place livable without redecorating it. Dinner was on the table at 6. Nathaniel came through the back door exactly on time and stopped in the doorway at the sight of proper plates instead of a pot left on the stove. You didn't have to cook for me. You have to eat. So do I. Doesn't make sense to cook twice. Halfway through the meal, he said, The men told me you brought them breakfast. I made enough. Seemed wasteful not to. That's above what I asked of you. I know. She met his eyes. I don't do things by halves, Mr. Cross. If I'm managing this household, I'm managing it properly. Nathaniel, he said. What? My name. Mr. Cross was my father. All right, she said. Nathaniel neither said much else, but when he stood to carry his plate to the sink, he carried hers too. She noticed. The days settled into something navigable. Clara learned the operation by paying attention and asking precise questions. She learned which men had wives living in the small cabins along the property's edge, isolated since the last housekeeper died, because no one had thought to maintain those connections. She started visiting. One woman, Dolores, had a baby with a persistent cough that Clara's mother's home remedies eased. Another, Sable's cousin Etta, was simply lonely in the way of a woman whose husband worked 16-hour days. Word came back to Nathaniel, always through Harold, that the camp wives were calling the new Mrs. Cross the best thing to happen to the place in years. He said nothing about it directly, but one evening he set a bolt of deep blue fabric on the table without explanation. "What's this for?" "Curtains." He walked through to the back room. She didn't thank him that night, but the next morning she made his coffee exactly the way she'd noticed he liked it, strong enough to stand a spoon in, and left it ready. He noticed that too. The operation itself never stopped demanding things. Broken equipment, unreliable supply runs, weather that turned without warning. Clara began to understand the particular weight Nathaniel carried, the responsibility for too many people and too many things that he never once set down. She saw it in the set of his jaw when Harold brought bad news, which was often. She saw it the night she came out for water and found him at the ledgers, exhaustion on his face so complete it looked like grief. "Go to bed," she said quietly. "The books will still be unbalanced in the morning." He looked at her like the instructions surprised him, like he'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone tell him to take care of himself. He closed the book and went. 3 weeks in, Clara broke the kitchen stove, trying to fix the draft herself. She found Harold in the equipment shed and asked, without shame, if he knew anything about cast-iron stoves. It took the better part of an afternoon, but by the time Nathaniel came in for dinner, the stove worked better than it ever had, and Clara had grease on her forearm she hadn't managed to scrub off. "Harold told me," he said, looking at the stove, then her arm, then her face. "I figured he would. It's fixed. Draft's better than before. You could have asked me. You were out at the mill. It needed handling. Clara." His voice had something in it she hadn't heard before. "You could have waited. I'm not very good at waiting." He was quiet, then said carefully, like handing her something fragile, "I know. I can see that." Something shifted in the room, small, almost imperceptible, like two plates of earth finding a fraction of give against each other. What nobody had warned her about, because it was the kind of thing you only learned by living it, was how hard it became to stay wary of a man who kept proving himself not worth being wary of. There was the matter of a young hand named Caleb who'd made a costly miscount on a supply order. Clara, in the kitchen with the office window open, heard Nathaniel walk him through it calmly, then say, "You're going to verify every order yourself for the next 6 months. You made a mistake, not a habit. Don't make it one." The boy wasn't fired. He was given a path forward. She went back to her bread dough and stopped reinforcing her defenses quite so carefully. The night that truly changed things was a Thursday in late October, when a storm rolled in off the lake without warning. Clara had been visiting Etta and barely made it back before the sky opened. She realized Nathaniel hadn't come in. Harold, dripping in the doorway, told her the old mare, Birdie, one of the original Cross timber horses, had gone down in the south field before the storm hit. Nathaniel had been with her since mid-afternoon. Clara took a lamp and walked to the barn herself. She found him kneeling in the straw, hand on the mare's neck, talking to her low and steady. He didn't look up when she came in. She sat on the other side of the horse and stayed, because there was nothing useful to say. Birdie didn't make it. When it was over, Nathaniel sat back on his heels, hands on his knees, looking at the ground. "I'm sorry," Clara said. "She was the first horse I bought when I took over this place. I should have gotten her in before the storm. You couldn't have known." He was quiet, then said something she didn't expect. "I hate losing things." No performance in it, just the bare truth of him, said to a woman who'd been his wife less than a month. Clara looked at him in the lamplight and thought, there it is. There's who this man actually is. "Come inside," she said. "I'll make coffee." They sat at the kitchen table for the better part of an hour, the storm working itself out against the windows. And Clara understood that something had passed between them that had nothing to do with debts or arrangements. Weeks accumulated into a routine. Clara reorganized the household accounts and found 2 invoices the supply merchant had charged twice, recovering the difference without drama. When she told Nathaniel over dinner, he set down his fork. "You've been overcharged on lumber freight for probably 2 years. I'm renegotiating the contract in the new year. Clara, I didn't ask you to do that. I know. Do you want me to stop?" He looked at her a long moment. "No," he said. "I don't want you to stop." The first time she heard town gossip about her husband, it cracked something open. At the dry goods store, 2 women near the fabric bolts didn't notice her behind the shelving. Heard Cross got himself a wife, Whitmore girl. Sold off, were they? Then quieter from the second woman, he sent 4 men to rebuild the Pruitt barn after the fire last spring, didn't charge a cent. And when the Garrity boy's father took ill, Cross sent men to bring in the harvest. Garrity didn't know who'd done it for months. Clara stood very still by the flour sacks. She thought about the ledgers, about the boy given a second chance, about 4 men sent to rebuild a stranger's barn without expectation of thanks. He's not feared because he's hard, she thought. He's feared because he doesn't need anything from anyone, and people who don't need anything are harder to understand than people who do. She brought it up that evening. "I heard about the Pruitt barn and the Garrity harvest. People talk too much. Why didn't you tell me? Doesn't need telling. It needed doing. It got done." "Were you always like this?" she asked. "Or did something make you this way?" A long pause. "My father wasn't," he said finally. "He owned people's debt the way some men own horses. Liked that they couldn't say no to him. When I took this place over, I decided whatever I built would be built different." He looked up. "Your family's debt, I don't hold it over you. I cleared it. That's not leverage. I want to be clear about that." Something loosened in Clara's chest. "I know," she said. "I just needed it said." The moment that cracked her last defense open had nothing to do with grand gestures. She heard raised voices in the yard. One of the hands Roy, chest to chest with a young man from the neighboring property. Nathaniel stepped between them without hesitation, one hand flat on Roy's chest. "Walk now." Then to the trembling neighbor boy, patiently. "What's the actual problem?" It turned out to fence line dispute. "I'll have Harold check Thesris for this week. You ride home and tell your father to expect my visit Saturday." After the boy rode off, Nathaniel turned and saw Clara at the door. He stopped beside her, close enough to touch. "Survey's probably fine. Roy's just got a temper. You're going to deal with Roy?" "Already did." She looked up at him and thought, suddenly and completely, no one has ever taken care of this man. He has spent his whole adult life taking care of everyone else, and it has never once occurred to anyone to ask if he needed looking after too. That is the loneliest thing I've ever understood about another person. "Sit down," she said. "I'll put lunch together." He sat, and the easing in his shoulders when he did was the truest thing she'd seen from him yet. 3 days later, Etta showed up at the main house, with her hands not quite still. Her husband had heard 2 men talking in the saloon the night before, men working for Desmond Ashford, who owned the lumber concern to the south. "They're saying Cross forced the marriage, that your family had no choice. And Ashford's been asking about the original property survey. His man's been in the registry office twice this month." Something cold moved through Clara. She thought about the old ledgers in the office she'd been slowly reorganizing, about a man powerful enough to look at Cross timber and decide he wanted it. "Not while I'm standing here," she thought. She went straight to the office and pulled every property document from the cabinet. When Nathaniel found her hours later surrounded by papers, his face went still in a different way than she'd seen before. The stillness of a man hearing a name he'd expected to hear eventually. "Desmond Ashford wants this land," he said. "Has for years. There's a water source on our western boundary that would make his southern holdings worth triple. He's tried to buy it twice. I said no both times." They worked through the documents together that night, and the following one, until at 11:30 Clara found it, a discrepancy between the original 1869 survey and an 1877 amendment. A single creek marker described differently 8 years apart. A strip of land 60 yards wide containing the water source, depending on which document a judge chose to honor. Who filed the amendment? Nathaniel checked the signature and went very still. Edmund Holt, county registrar at the time. He paused. "Ashford's man at the registry, that's his grandson." The plot had been ceded 20 years before Desmond Ashford was even old enough to want the land. They hired a lawyer, Thomas Aldridge, sharp, unimpressed by trouble, 60 years old. He read both documents 3 times. "If there's an error here, it was put there deliberately," he said. "The question is whether we can prove intent." He had them go through every box of old correspondence in the office. At the bottom of the 3rd crate, Clara found a brittle, folded letter addressed to Nathaniel's father, dated the same year as the amendment. It was from the original surveyor, warning that the county registrar had been approached by an unnamed party with significant interest to the south to alter the boundary description. The surveyor had refused and written to warn Nathaniel's father. "He never told you," Clara said quietly. "No," Nathaniel said. "He didn't." 4 days before the hearing, Ashford made his move through the bank, buying up an old note on a 15-year debt and calling it due immediately, timed to land a week before court. Clara checked the books before Nathaniel was even up and met him at the fence line with the news. "It's manageable," she said. "We have the reserve from the lumber contract. It wipes most of it out, but we can cover it. He wants us rattled going into that courtroom. We're not going to give it to him." She gathered her reins. "I'm going to talk to the Pruitts and the Garrettys. You've helped half this county and never asked for anything back. It's time we find out if they'll stand up in a courtroom and say who you actually are." Ashford found them on the road one evening, flanked by 2 city lawyers. He looked at Clara the way men like him looked at women, calculating whether she was an asset or a liability. "I'd prefer to discuss this man to man. My wife isn't going anywhere," Nathaniel said. "There's no legal question," Clara added. "The amendment is fraudulent. We have the proof. You'll hear about it formally when our lawyer files tomorrow." Something behind Ashford's eyes recalculated fast. He'd expected to find Nathaniel Cross isolated, distracted by a new domestic arrangement. Instead, he'd found him with a partner. "This isn't finished," Ashford said. "No," Nathaniel agreed. "It isn't." The morning of the hearing, the courthouse was more crowded than Clara expected. The Pruitts were there, the Garrettys, all of them. Etta in her best dress, standing straight. Caleb, the young hand who'd been given a second chance in a clean shirt too large for him, come on his own. Judge Holloway gave nothing away through the proceedings. Aldridge laid out the case methodically. The original survey, the amendment, the handwriting discrepancy, the surveyor's letter. Ashford's lawyers objected twice. Both objections were overruled. Then came the character witnesses, one after another, describing a man who showed up for people without ever announcing it. When Clara was called, she told the truth without softening any part of it. The debt, the kitchen table conversation, the choice Nathaniel had given her. Ashford's lawyer tried to suggest the offer itself had been a form of pressure. "I felt pressure from my family's circumstances," Clara said, "not from my husband. I agreed to this marriage because I determined he was an honest man making an honest offer. I have found considerable evidence since then that I was right." Under the table, Nathaniel's hand found hers and stayed there. During the 40-minute recess, sitting in the hallway among the families who'd come to stand with them, Nathaniel said quietly, "I never meant for you to stay. I told myself it was practical. You'd run the house, I'd clear the debt, fair exchange. I didn't plan for you." "I know," Clara said. "That's why I stayed. Not the debt, not the contract. Because you're the most honest person I've ever met, and you don't quit on anything worth not quitting on." He had no words for that, which from him said everything. Judge Holloway ruled in under an hour. The amendment was found procedurally irregular, the original survey reinstated as controlling, Ashford's claim dismissed in full. He left the courtroom without speaking to anyone, his hands, Clara noticed, not nearly as controlled as his face. The drive home was different from every drive before it. The weight of it was gone. "The ranch is going to need new fencing on the south boundary before winter," Nathaniel said eventually. "I already put it in the supply order, before or after you were organizing character witnesses and sorting out the bank." During. He laughed then, properly, for the first time she'd heard, long and unguarded, like a man finally setting down something he'd been carrying, so long he'd forgotten the weight of it. She laughed too, and they drove the rest of the way home like that, for no reason except the sheer relief of it. Months later, on a morning in early spring, Clara walked the south pasture beside her husband. The fencing was new, the grass was coming back. Somewhere near the barn, one of the younger hands was singing something badly to himself, and the sound of it made her smile. Nathaniel stopped walking. She stopped beside him. "You were never part of the arrangement," he said, the way he said things he meant most. Whatever I told myself at the start about being practical, it was wrong. You became something I didn't know I was missing. I know, she said softly. I became part of the life. He took her hand, and they stood together in the wind, moving through the south pasture. And Clara thought about a young woman who had signed a contract with a shaking hand and called it survival. It hadn't stayed that. It had become a real and particular and chosen life, built from scratch in a place she hadn't planned to be, beside a man she hadn't planned to love. She had been afraid. She had been angry. She had been certain that circumstance had taken everything from her. And on the other side of all of it, she had found something no arrangement could have guaranteed and no debt could have purchased. She had found someone worth staying for. And she had been brave enough, just barely, just enough to stay. That was not luck. That was two people choosing each other, one honest day at a time. And it was the only way a love that lasts has ever been built.